Good afternoon, everyone. It's just about 2 o'clock, so we'll get started. I am Rebecca Helman, and welcome to the Herren Project's webinar, a discussion of mental health in children, fostering mental health and mental wellness in children. A couple of housekeeping items today. There will be a presentation. If you have questions, you can feel free to put those in the question and answer portion of your Zoom. It's either at the very top or the very bottom of your screen. It should say Q&A. Please feel free to put your questions in there. I will get to them when I end, and then we'll go through and answer all those questions for you. If you are joining us, welcome from Facebook. Please feel free to put your questions in the comments, and I will get them, and I will get to them as soon as possible once we open it up for questions. So let's begin. Who we are the Herren Project. We're a national nonprofit organization. We provide free resources and support for treatment, recovery, and prevention of substance use disorder. Treatment and recovery services include treatment navigation and placement, long-term recovery support for individuals and families, online support groups, as well as scholarships for treatment programs, recovery housing, and recovery coaching. Herren Project's prevention and wellness initiatives provide schools and communities resources to prevent the misuse of drugs and alcohol. Herren Project Clubs and Wellness Week with Herren promote healthy choices, bring positive awareness to the disease of addiction, and empower individuals to cope with life's challenges substance-free. Herren Project was founded in 2011 by former professional basketball player Chris Herren, who has been in long-term recovery since August 1st, 2008. As a member of the Herren family of brands, Herren Project represents one step in the journey to recovery. Chris Herren also shares his own journey as a national public speaker through Herren Talks and helps others learn skills to stay substance-free through his residential holistic health and wellness program, Herren Wellness. Who am I? I am Rebecca Helman. I have a master's degree in social work from Boston University. I've been in the field of mental health for over 25 years. I've treated people in public high schools, mental health centers, and sober living facilities. Currently, I am the school adjustment counselor in a public high school on the South Shore of Massachusetts. I have a successful private practice here in Plymouth, as well as I oversee their family support services for the Herren Project. I've specialized in addiction recovery, anxiety, trauma, and grief. I run 4 grief support groups for the Herren Project and 2 family support groups as well. The objectives for our webinar today are to gain an understanding of what healthy emotional development in children looks like. I'll be also discussing what social emotional competence means. You will learn how to begin to talk to your children about their emotions and feelings. Lastly, I will make a connection between fostering social emotional wellness in children to lowering their risk of substance use disorder in the future. I feel it's important to see that there is a connection between risk factors of substance use disorder and mental health. In general, there are some commonalities of people with substance use disorder regarding their mental health. The idea here is to foster greater mental health in children so that they carry a lower risk of substance use disorder as they grow up. So the first thing I'd like to share with you is this Venn diagram I developed some years ago as I started treating patients and I saw patterns. So what I was seeing with patients with substance use disorder was that there tended to be 3 common areas of risk. There was the first area that I've labeled predisposition, which in pink. It refers to the tendency to a condition or a quality, usually based on some combination of a genetic factor and an environmental factor. So we often think of genetic predisposition when we think about disorders or illnesses, but certain environments can also create a predisposition through either learned behaviors or witnessed behaviors. So it indicates that somebody is predisposed to potentially to a higher risk of substance use. The second area of risk, which is labeled in yellow on my chart here, is emotional regulation. This refers to a person's ability to manage how they feel by using developed coping skills. So this looks at what we do for ourselves when we are feeling uncomfortable. How do we soothe ourselves? How do we calm ourselves so that our functioning isn't disrupted? And lastly, in the green circle, I've labeled it access. And access refers to the ability to obtain a substance. So if we're looking at this Venn diagram in regards to risks of substance use disorder, access is how easy or difficult is it to get the substance, either the drugs or the alcohol, or if we're thinking of other addictions as well. So these three common risk factors that I've noted can sometimes create that perfect storm, that area in the middle. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to keep this diagram in mind, and we're going to revisit it towards the end of the webinar. I'd like you to keep in mind that yellow circle. That's the emotional regulation. So as we look at the pink and the red, as a child, we really don't have much control over what we are predisposed to, our predisposition. And certainly we don't have a lot of control over access. So as we grow up and develop and mature, the one area of risk that we all have the ability to impact ourselves is our ability to regulate our emotions, begin to feel comfortable in our own skin. And that's what I'd really like to take a look at today for children. So first, we need to understand what typical healthy early child development looks like. There's been tons of research and theories created and done to take a look at how we all develop. So Erik Erikson is a famous theorist who developed the theory of psychosocial stages. And what he said was that there are psychosocial stages that cover the lifespan. He discovered that in every stage of a person's life, there are basic conflicts. When a person resolves these conflicts, there's a new area of psychosocial development that evolves. So for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to focus on those first 4 stages, starting in infancy all the way through school age. And Erikson taught that the development of hope, will, purpose, and competence are developed during these stages. So let's take a look here. Each stage is an opportunity to develop an emotional trait or skill that will lead to a resolution and develop virtue that is carried throughout your life. So we're going to take a look at these first 4, starting with the red. In Erikson's first stage of development, which takes place in infancy from birth to about 1 year old, psychosocial, the conflict that he suggests is trust versus mistrust. So this is typically worked through from the infant by the caretaker or parent, who is the one who will provide the child with their basic needs. So, we don't think too much about this time. The baby cries, the caretaker attends to them. But in those actions, infants are still learning. The conflict in infancy is resolved when the child can learn to trust when they act. Somebody's going to respond. So they begin to learn cause and effect. It's very simple. But for example, when a baby cries and its parent or caregiver respond either by picking it up or to soothe it or to feed it, the baby learns to trust. Although that's very simplified, over time, this is how infants begin to develop a sense of trust or mistrust, cause and effect. If I act, there will be a response. So it's never too early to begin supporting a child's social and emotional development. Research findings show that infants are born with the ability to connect to other people in their environment. It's usually that primary caretaker or family member. Infants recognize familiar voices and even can match tones of voice to facial expressions. The brain of an infant is designed to connect with the people who care for it. An infant's brain matures through interactions between that infant and its environment. So the infant communicates its needs and emotions, and the adults respond to their needs, establishing those learning pathways in the brain that lead to all physical, cognitive, and emotional learning. So that's really the beginning, the cornerstone, that beginning of the path. So that's the first stage of Erikson's psychosocial stages of development. The second stage, which is here in orange, is the conflict is autonomy versus shame. So during the ages of 2 and 3, children begin to work through with their caregivers the ability to have some autonomy or independence. When children are unable to establish healthy autonomy, they are left feeling doubtful about their own abilities. So this over time can create feelings of shame. So we can take a look, if people typically have called it the terrible twos, the threes aren't so great either all the time, but it's in those stages where children begin to test what they can do on their own and what they still need their parents' help for. That's why it's such a difficult, sometimes tumultuous time. When a child can develop their own autonomy, they begin to have a sense of will and can then exercise some freedoms as well as some self-restraint. So once a child is able to develop a sense of autonomy and independence, their confidence increases as well. And therefore there is less doubt, self-doubt, and shame. A deep sense of autonomy is the stepping stone of confidence in self. So without that, without resolving that conflict, children tend to feel doubt and shame, which are two emotions that can be very detrimental to children and even adults. And if we look at feelings that typically rear their heads in substance use disorder, certainly doubt and guilt and shame are all in there. We move to Erikson's third of the 4 stages we're going to cover today, and that is the preschool stage, his 3rd stage of childhood, shown here in yellow, and it occurs between roughly the ages of 4 to 6-year-old. And this conflict to be resolved is initiative versus guilt. This means that during this stage, children are working to develop initiative and learning how to develop a sense of purpose. So it's not just being independent. At this point, it's about finding purpose. It's usually the relationships formed with the child and their family that help resolve this psychosocial conflict. The child begins to wonder how they can assert some power. So this is normal and important for children to be able to do. In this stage, children's ability to initiate their own activities, self-play, as well as beginning to develop early relationships is incredibly important. If you've ever walked into a daycare center or a preschool class, you can begin to see children working this conflict out, where they choose their own activities. It's important that they finish their own projects. They choose their own colors of things. They develop a real purpose. You know, the excitement of a child who gets to be a line leader, right? There's a purpose. Those are all, we think of them as little things that just happen to happen in preschools or daycares, and yet it's all part of developing the child's sense of self. These are perfect examples of successfully working through those stages. When the conflict, however, is not resolved in this stage, a child can find themselves feeling guilty and not enough. So as adults, we can appreciate those feelings, certainly, of having purpose, and without them, we too can feel less than. We also think about having purpose and feeling less than and guilty. Those are also feelings that unresolved can enter the world of substance use disorder as well. Our last stage that I want to cover is Erickson's fourth stage, of school age stage, from ages roughly 7 to 12. And the conflict here is develop industry versus inferiority. So what is meant by this is that the children are given opportunities to develop confidence in many areas, right? So these early school age stage takes a look at how to follow rules, how to develop intellectual and social skills. This is typically the first opportunity children have to resolve or work through one of these psychosocial conflicts with people outside of their families. So in the previous 3 stages, these interactions, these conflicts were resolved typically with the primary caregiver, whether that is a parent or a grandparent or caregiver, guardian. This fourth stage in school age is the first real opportunity that children have to work through this conflict with someone outside their family. And that is an incredibly important component. Because what happens here is that they begin to see themselves in a way that's much different than their family. It becomes important, the competence about feeling good about who they are as individuals outside of their family. This is the beginning of understanding self-awareness and emotional regulation. If we think back to that Venn diagram, that emotional regulation is what we're really looking to be able to help increase and support. Social emotional health is a key component to academic achievement, health, and success in a lifetime. It's formed through infants and toddlers' strong, supportive relationships with their parents and their caregivers, and the experience of a safe, nurturing environment. One of the most important hallmarks of a healthy social emotional development is the child's ability to regulate their emotions. So I now have said it a number of times. Emotional regulation, basically, it refers to the ability to identify, understand, and process one's feelings within a range that does not interfere with one's functioning. So when we're able to identify our feelings and understand how to regulate them, we're far more likely to have a positive outcome. If we're unable to do so, it may result in impulsivity, acting out, or self-injurious behavior. So if we look for an example of having an uncomfortable feeling, if we are able to identify what that feeling is, we're able to develop coping skills to combat or address those feelings, then we're able to resolve them in a way that doesn't then interfere with our daily functioning. If not, what happens is we're unable to identify and unable to cope. And then typically what we see, certainly in children, is some impulsivity, some acting out, because there's an inability to be able to cope and regulate. So the goal for children certainly first is that we need to help them develop these regulation skills. So what we see in school age children who begin to have some emotional regulation is some examples here. There's a way that they can show concern and empathy for peers. So when a child is able to see something in someone else, they're clearly able to identify what that is. So again, some of these things must sound like very small little examples, but a child being able to have empathy for another child means they know what that feeling is, and they have a sense of what it's like to feel that way. So with that, they begin to show greater cooperation and collaboration with peers. They are able to tolerate fear. They are able to create patience. So can wait for a short time. Again, having that ability to be still with yourself as adults is so incredibly difficult for us. It starts in childhood. So if somebody can just wait and postpone gratification, that is an example of regulating your emotions. And if we take a look at that same age, those school age children, their social development and attachment in terms of others, we begin to notice the enjoyment they can get out of joint play. Pretending to play with peers, again, requires self-awareness, requires emotional regulation, knowing what feelings are, being able to identify and express them, being able to recognize when somebody is absent. So again, understanding who they are as a child within a group, and has some secure relationships with adults. So the self-awareness component, very important. So this is where children discover, where do I end and you begin? So throughout childhood, there are many opportunities for parents and guardians to teach this. Certainly my favorite is that day we drop our child off for school for the first time, and or we take them to overnight camp, and we leave them with a sitter or some way in which there's a separation. Children begin to notice who they are when they are not with their caregiver. So that's in that school-aged stage that Erik Erikson developed. Those are those beginning times of being able to practice those coping skills without our primary caregiver there, which means these are the opportunities children have to begin to make those choices for themselves, to begin to self-soothe themselves and rely on other adults when they need help outside of those primary caregivers. We can begin to look at how children develop the ability to regulate their emotions. We want to look at how they can feel confident and trust. It's paramount for children to understand that they are separate from their parents and therefore begin to understand what they need. Children rely on their parents and caregivers to fulfill most of their needs, but as they enter school, as I said, this is where they can begin to do this on their own, which gives them an opportunity to feel very successful. And if they are unable to do this, it also provides an opportunity, again, for them to ask for help, which is a skill that is required of all of us. Self-awareness plays that role in every relationship that a child has, and that they will have as they grow up. This is the beginning. This is the beginning of boundary setting. So where do I end? Where are my boundaries, and where do you begin? And children begin to understand there's actually space in between. The science of early childhood development tells us that where there's sound mental health, it's usually built early in life. Children's early experiences shape that architecture of the brain. These critical experiences include children's relationships with parents and caregivers, relatives, extended family, teachers, and peers even. These interactions and relationships shape social, emotional, and cognitive development. So attention to early mental health is crucial in preventing some of these social and emotional impairments we see later on in life. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. I'm going to get to them as soon as we finish. We have a little bit more to go, but just as a reminder. Children are not little adults. You know, it's interesting. We look at them and some of them are present very well and are articulate, but children's brains are still developing well into their 20s. So for us to assume that a child is going to understand concepts and really be able to digest concepts and emotions and situations that adults, it's very unrealistic. Children need different amounts of time to process ideas and concepts. They also need a safe place to be able to express those thoughts and ideas and feelings. And children need to be taught how to best express those in a healthy way. So one mistake that many of us make is that we kind of assume that children are just smaller versions of adults, but their development physically, intellectually, and psychologically is much different. When I start to think about how to teach children about their emotions, it's important that we stop for a minute and try to take a look at life through their eyes. So I want you all to share with me my favorite example of what this looks like is understanding seeing the world through a child's eyes. So if you've ever ridden with in a car with a child at night, this is my best example. It's not uncommon that child will look up into the night sky and see the moon and say something like, "Mom, the moon is following us," or believe that the moon is following them, as they are, in their eyes, the center, and the moon is just kind of tagging along. As we grow up and become adults, we know that the moon's not following us. We're the ones moving. The moon's in the sky. We are not the center of the universe. But if we look at all of the experiences through that appropriate self-centered lens of a child, we then are better equipped to teach them about their thoughts and feelings. If we teach it through our lens, we're going to miss the mark tremendously with children. We need to teach them and be where they are. So healthy ways to start to model this. So here's where we're going to start to talk about how do we do all this? We know it's important. We know the theories behind why it's important. We know it would interfere with their development if we don't do this. Okay, so how do we do this? Healthy ways to model emotional wellness. So the first thing that I think is incredibly important is giving children words for their feelings. So not just happy and sad. Give them all the words. Children who have words for feelings are less likely to act them out. So a child who can say, "I'm feeling angry," is less likely to act out physically in anger. Giving children words such as frustrated, excited, worried, confused. These are all different than just their basic happy, sad, angry. So if your child is more nonverbal, there are plenty of opportunities to either learn sign language for emotions, but also drawing what they're feeling or role playing. So being able to model what their face might look like if they're feeling a certain way, being able to draw, use colors and art to express. So I frequently will say to young children, when I feel angry, my face looks like this, or if I'm sad, you might see a tear. Some other ways of what you can do is giving some suggestions, like I want to listen to music or sing when I feel like crying. You want to just be able to validate that whatever their emotion they are experiencing is okay to have. So however that works, but the more ways we can give children to express their feelings, the less likely they are to act them out or to keep them inside. So we're validating emotions such as, "It looks like you feel sad," or what would make you feel better? What do you think, if you're feeling angry, what do you think would help? So having conversations, not avoiding the emotion in children, but really validating what we know is that once an emotion or even a thought is validated, we feel more hopeful about being able to resolve it. So we start this discussion. We start this discussion with children, and given given that we are the Herren Project, I don't typically talk to small children about substances or substance use disorder, but I rather spend the time talking about and helping them develop coping skills, because I know that those will, in the future, lower risk. So these topics can be, woven into conversations with children. We want to begin to start developing coping skills in children. And I've listed here on this screen a number of ways we can develop those coping skills. So once that our children can identify and express and verbalize their feelings, we can start to give them skills to regulate and tolerate them. So for example, if your child is feeling sad, we can help them identify what they're feeling, how to self-soothe, or be able to ask for comfort. These are skills not only helpful for children, but also adults and all the way throughout our life. Working through feelings with another person is a gift we can give our children. So the gift of asking for help. Our children will feel things that they don't like, such as frustration or disappointment. But it's important for us to model how to cope with those feelings until they pass, instead of fixing those feelings with something else. So for example, if your child is feeling worried, you can redirect them to notice what is happening in the moment and to stay present. It's hard work to do, but it pays off when our children can identify and express and work through uncomfortable emotions instead of running away from or bottling or ignoring. Researchers have found a connection between children who have developed coping skills and lower risk of substance use in their future. So some healthy coping skills include, so here we have movement and exercise. So obviously we know children need movement. It's a healthy way for children to release excess energy when they're feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, or even overjoyed. Sometimes feeling extreme joy can be overwhelming. Movement is an excellent way to help kids regulate their emotions. If we model this as a coping skill and encourage children to turn to physical activities when they're struggling with difficult emotions or situations, it may become a natural way for them to cope as they face challenges as they grow up. Music is another incredible way to start developing coping skills. So children respond to music, whether they're making their own music, listening to music, but music has an effect on our brains and our bodies. So it's been incorporated into exercise techniques. Some therapies are music related, but providing children with another outlet to notice the calming effect music can have offers incredible benefits. So encouraging children to express themselves through music also can develop a lifelong interest as well. Not all children love to sing, certainly, or even listen to music, but some are more prone to wanting to create artwork and drawing or writing. And it's an excellent way of being able to express feelings through color or words. So children can use different mediums, so paint, crayons, clay, to create objects that represent how they may be feeling. So having the ability to move thoughts and feelings out of their heads onto paper creatively can be an incredible way to cope with their stresses. The next coping skill is deep breathing or relaxation. And I know that sounds super heavy, that how could kids possibly do deep breathing and relaxation, but we call them belly breaths or balloon breaths when I'm working with little children. And they can help kids settle their minds and their bodies. So beginning to create a skill set that allows children to notice that they have an effect on how their bodies feel is incredibly, incredibly important. So even when children are not feeling super comfortable with it, they can breathe, they can still take a breath. And over time, it will take practice in terms of seeing how they can affect their stress level. And when they're not uncomfortable, when they're just feeling okay, it's a great opportunity to start practicing so that when they are more stressed, they already have that skill set. And finally, practice mindfulness and gratitude. Again, that sounds like an incredibly heavy task, mindfulness for a child. But I think they have the ability to be more mindful than adults do, as they are very often in the present moment. So again, our children are not little adults, so their brains are working extremely hard to take in information and understand it much differently than ours do. So being mindful for children means staying connected to the here and now. So what does their body feel like? What do they notice in the world around them? You know, children typically will look for the good in situations. So encouraging and nurturing that skill helps them develop gratitude. And it's nearly impossible to feel gratitude and misery at the same time. So being able to help a child stay in the moment, help them understand that the glass is half full, is important for perspective. So we've talked a little bit about how to talk to your child, your elementary school child. Parents and caretakers are the biggest influence and impact on emotional development for children. So children watch us and listen and repeat what they see. So they develop their view of the world and how it works from watching and experiencing what's happening with the adults around them. So we have an incredible important responsibility to our children, all of our children. Elementary age children are, for the first time, navigating social situations in schools without their parents. So they learn to trust other adults, such as teachers and counselors, as well as face those decision-making opportunities daily. So here are those opportunities for children to practice that autonomy, whether it's choosing an outfit, what they're going to eat for lunch, how to finish their schoolwork. They may not seem like huge decisions, but every one that a child is able to make and feel confident about is an amazing skill building opportunity. Developing a confidence in their decision-making and vocalizing their needs, asking for help is an incredibly important skill for everyone, regardless of age. But for children, this confidence is developed and through the help of those trusting adults around them. So I've added some of my favorite resources for children. And I've had to kind of update it given that school age children, even younger ones, use apps on smartphones and devices and tablets. So, you know, we think about things in our world that we probably have taken for granted. Some of us old enough to remember original Sesame Street, but Daniel's Neighborhood, those are all real, or used to be Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, really excellent examples of where children can see and have normalized for them the idea of feelings and coping skills and differences in empathy. Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown is another good one. And two movies that are more recent, Soul, but Inside Out, which is my favorite because it gives children an opportunity to see an emotion in character form. And then be able to, again, kind of make it personal, how that emotion reacts in our brain. So a couple of incredible books, some oldies but goodies, certainly Sylvester and the Magic Pebble and The Giving Tree, and When Sophie Gets Angry, really angry, are both amazing. A couple of my favorites that I use with children frequently are the book Visiting Feelings and My Many Colored Days. Again, My Many Colored Days by Dr. Seuss has it gives color and a visual to each emotion. And I think that's important for children. And then I've added just two because I'd like to stick with books, but two applications for children, Settle Your Glitter and Avocado Emotions, that are useful, certainly. Nothing substitutes the personal, loving interaction of a caregiver for sure. So why did I think this was an important webinar to present? Why I work at the Herren Project. Most of my work is done with adolescents and adults and families. And over the course of my professional career, I've always strived to find the youngest age that I can affect so that I can prevent substance use disorder in the future. And I work primarily with high school students. And I think that was a little bit not too old, but I went to work with some middle school students as well. And now I love working with the elementary school students because I think this is where we really need to start making some impacts and to do some prevention work. So here we have our risk factors again for substance use disorder. Let's look at them separately. That predisposition and access to substance, the two on the end. We don't really have a lot of daily control over that. Certainly we can't choose what we are predisposed to from a genetic standpoint, certainly in a familial standpoint. And we don't always have control over what is out there. And so what we do have control over is how we see the world, how we react, and how we regulate ourselves. So here it is. When we combine those two, this is why it's important. That emotional regulation that I've been talking about for this last 40 or so minutes, it is the part we have the most control over, and that we can help our children develop skills to combat. So when children's social and emotional health is compromised, it can create significant challenges for children, leading to failures in school and inabilities to sustain friendships and relationships, and really just negative feelings about themselves. 1 in 5 children enter kindergarten with poor social development skills, and it's difficult for them to join when they play with other children or their ability to make and keep deep friendships. They don't positively interact with peers all the time. So it is important because this is what we want to do to set our children up for the best opportunities possible and to lower their risk of substance use disorder. In my opinion, there is nothing more important for our future than to foster the best in our children. Here is my contact information and the Herren Project contact information for sure. This webinar will also be on our website, the recording of this. So if you have a question and I don't get to it, or you think of it after the fact, or if you're watching this and you want to send me a question, please feel free. That is my email address. And I would like to see about, okay, so I'd like to take some questions. When children don't develop these coping skills, what makes some turn to substances or others not? Or is not developing coping skills a precursor for either substance abuse or self-harm or other behaviors? That's an excellent question, Melissa. So there's a lot in there. So what I'd say is that developing coping skills, having a healthy sense of self and being able to regulate your emotions lessens your risk. So it's not that if you don't have coping skills, you turn to drugs or alcohol or substances. It's that if you have the skills to be able to soothe yourself from within, you are less likely to seek something outside of yourself to make you feel better. So whether that it is a substance or money or relationships, it's a matter of developing the self-awareness to regulate your emotions so that you don't go outside yourself. Again, the idea of fixing feelings with feelings. So if you have a negative or an uncomfortable feeling that you don't want to have, and you don't have a coping skill to help handle that, do you look toward to a substance that you know is going to make you feel better? Or do you sit with that uncomfortable feeling knowing that if you just use your coping skills, ask for help, that it'll pass. So why do some turn to substances or some not? I think some has to do with some of those other risk factors. I think there are some who are predisposed certainly to certain conditions, and also some environments that children grow up in can have an effect. So if using substances, either alcohol or drugs, is what a child sees, then that is an option in terms of how they understand the world. Remember, children are always watching us, and then they mimic and repeat. So they do that with our excellent coping skills, and they do that with our not so excellent coping skills. And developing coping skills precursor to self-harm. It can be, again, it's whether a person is able to self-regulate their own emotions, or whether they're looking, again, outside of themselves. So, okay, let me see. I don't know if I see any other questions. That was a great question. I think that sometimes we look to say, well, why do some kids, why do some kids use substances and some don't? And again, I think that sometimes it's the perfect storm. I think for some children, not having some coping skills, not understanding who they are and feel good about who they are and be able to sit with themselves, paired with maybe possibly a predisposition, but access. That's where the component of access comes in. If there are substances, drugs or alcohol available, again, then it's an opportunity and an option for some children, young children too. And that goes even as far, vaping, e-cigarettes, tobacco, any of it. If we know it's going to change how we feel, then that sometimes is inviting to some. So, again, I know I've given a lot of information. I don't see any other questions. I am certainly available. My email address was on the screens, Rebecca@herrenproject.org. I will gladly answer any questions if you think of them after the fact. I really appreciate everybody who has signed on and listened, and I look forward to doing more of these with you all in the future. I hope you all have a great day. Thanks so much for joining me.